Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the Royal Ontario Museum on the occasion of the Eva Holtby Lecture, presented by the ROM Centre for Contemporary Culture. I'm Mark Engstrom. I'm Deputy Director for Collections and Research here at the ROM. ROM Contemporary Culture is one of our 8 centers of discovery that provide a lens through which our visitors can understand the content and strengths of the museum, and a principle we use ourselves to organize the museum's activities and program. ROM Contemporary Culture brings innovative programming and exhibits to the museum exploring current issues and promoting interaction and dialogue among our visitors. Each year, ROM Contemporary Culture chooses an idea, an issue, or a theme to investigate. And this year, in 2013, the theme is Environment and Climate Change, and we explore the relationship between nature and culture by asking, how does the landscape change culture, and how does culture change the landscape? The Eva Holtby Lecture brings powerful voices to the museum to discuss provocative and engaging ideas, and has grown to become a highly anticipated yearly event. And this year's Holtby Lecture also coincides with the recently opened ROM Contemporary Culture exhibition, Carbon 14, Climate is Culture, presented in partnership with Cape Farewell in our Roloff Benny Gallery on the 4th floor. So at this time, on behalf of the ROM, I would like to welcome Christopher Holtby, whose family, he and Marcus are here this evening, and his family generously sponsors this event through the Holtby Endowment Fund. Christopher?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I thought it'd be helpful for you to know a little bit more about my mom and why this endowed lecture even exists. So my mom grew up in Austria during World War II, and as we all know, that was a period of no communication and great hatred. And one of the things that my dad wanted to do from my mom's experiences growing up during World War II in Austria is that from his love of my mom, he endowed this annual lecture in memory of her, and really just part of their continued love story. Because the essence of this lecture is really what embodied my mother. She loved to bring together strangers, no joke, strangers. And she loved to listen to contemporary topics and then have those topics work together and listen together within a group of people to promote an understanding. And she'd just be tickled pink to have Antony Gormley here this evening, because he's going to discuss the relationship between our bodies and the space all around us, and then how we experience that space daily. So it should be really interesting, and thank you so much for coming. Thank you very much. What?
Thank you, Christopher and Marcus, for your generous support of this annual lecture.
Oh, it does.
And now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Antony Gormley. Antony is widely acclaimed, as you all well know, that's why you're here, for his sculpture, installations, and public artwork that investigate the relationship of the human body to space. His incredibly broad and innovative work includes the monumental Event Horizon, a series of casts of his own body posed on the South Bank in London, his iconic sculpture Angel of the North, which so many of us know well, and locally, Intimate Relations, which he presented in the McLaren Art Center in Barrie. I've got about 5 or 6 others that are my favorites, but I'll let him talk about them in the talk. Dr. Gormley was awarded the Turner Prize in 1994, the South Bank Prize for Visual Art in 1999, the Bernard Hellinger Award for Sculpture in 2007, and the Obayashi Prize in 2012. In 1997, he was made an officer of the British Empire, and he's an honorary fellow of the Royal Institute of British Architects, and holds an honorary doctorate of the University of Cambridge, and is a fellow of the Trinity and Jesus Colleges in Cambridge. Dr. Gormley has been a Royal Academician since 2003, and a member of the British Museum Trustees since 2007. So Antony, could I invite you up to the stage?
Sure. Thank you, Bob. So, everybody, it's wonderful. Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, the Holtby family. Thank you, ROM. Thank you, Cape Farewell, for allowing me to be here. I have to say, I've spent the last 2 days in the Windsor Hotel trying to prepare for this moment, because I don't think there is any bigger issue that faces all of us individually, as families, as groups, as tribes, as villages, as cities, than anthropic influence on climate. Anyway, I just want to begin with a few words of reassurance. And it's very good that we have the company of a Hadrosaurus and Vairocana. Vairocana, the divine light image of Buddha. That's reassuring. And Hadrosaurus that disappeared 66 million years ago, which isn't quite so reassuring. And, well, the reassurance is that we actually are going to be extinct one day. That's definite. The question is, how long is that going to take? And whether we're going to be involved with prolonging the distance between now and that inevitability. Now, I normally speak freely and not from notes, but the last 48 hours in the Windsor Arms Hotel, I have made this last will and testament. And I'm going to, I hope you'll forgive me, I'm going to read it, but after this bit, I'm going to talk to Sarah, and I hope you'll, join in, basically. I need to ask whether, fantastic, we had half of my talk. No, this is the same half, but never mind. I'm gonna. No, this was good. We had a half of it, and then the computer ran out. But that's a kind of small sign of a bigger problem. You can see. Anyway, I'm gonna start by reading from paper, and then I'm gonna start reading from digital image, beamed through the internet, which is going to be very exciting. Now, I think we will need slides, but not quite yet. So. Broadly speaking, as I see it, we have two choices about how to deal with this, as I've said, our greatest challenge. Either we agree with Teilhard de Chardin's conviction that the human race is the most complex culmination of all biological evolution from its start 3.7 billion years ago. Perhaps combine it with Vernadsky's notion of the noosphere, that which is a beautiful idea, this final encirclement of the globe by mind. We have geology, the earth, we have the atmosphere, we have the stratosphere, but then we have some other force, which he calls the noosphere, the encirclement of the globe by mind, and it's difficult not to think about the internet as the objective correlative, the materialization of that. And then agree with Stuart Brand, marvelous Stuart Brand, our friend Stuart Brand of the Whole Earth Catalogue and Whole Earth Discipline, and his insistence on one life. And this idea that the human project and the technology that we've developed is in some way the flowering of an evolutionary tree representing the whole of the biosphere. And if we are the intelligence of all life, then we cannot be, as James Lovelock has recently suggested, too stupid and too selfish to cure our own ills and be the cause of the temporary death of this planet. But through bio and geoengineering, we will find intelligent solutions that will allow us to participate in the continued evolution rather than dissolution of the biosphere. Or there's the other view. that you could term our default position, in which, in a time of mass urbanization, we're told that 1.3 million of our species are migrating to the city every week, and that with well over 50% of humankind now living within the urban grid, we will continue to reinforce the standoff between the citizen, the city dweller, and the natural world. How much of what caused the West to rise is based on this implicit belief in a shared culture formed in the city, a belief held implicitly by the pioneers that wrested this continent from its native inhabitants, which is based on a distinction between the civilized and the savage, or the absolute difference between culture and nature. If that distinction persists, there can be no chance, either for us or for the biosphere. I ask myself whether we can any longer speak about human nature in that common, everyday, well-used phrase, because it no longer conveys connection with the elements, but somehow with ourselves, with an obsession with ourselves, with our own lives, abilities, desires, smartphones. Don't worry, I have a smartphone. I hope it's not on. But the point is that I am in this situation too. The question before us is whether human nature can reimagine itself not as that which makes us distinct from nature, but as a catalyst which can translate it, perhaps transforming it in ourselves at the same time. This has to involve the collapsing of the dialectic which has grown up between the analytic intelligence of science and the intuitive thoughtfulness of art, in redefining what true progress might be, which cannot be anything other than the continuation of evolution, using the fuller knowledge now with us of, for example, both the human genome and all other genomes, and the final collapse of the frontier that divides the very great from the very small, or the reconciliation of gravity and quantum mechanics. And maybe not least through the open door of neuroscience, what I feel is our better understanding of how we think and feel. The biggest technological challenge is what Ian McEwan proposes in his wicked little novel, Solar. Can we stop exploiting the battery of stored photosynthetic activity of millions of years of plant activity, materialized in the fossil fuels, an exploitation that soils our nest, and find an intelligent way of using the remaining 6 billion years of solar energy available to us at that great nuclear generator at the center of our solar system, and invent an artificial form of photosynthesis. But anyway, you're wondering, it's very, very clear that most of you know a lot more about climate science than I do. What am I doing lecturing you about things that you know very much better than me? I'm sure that you're very, very aware of the appalling statistics that the IPCC continue to give us, and the fact that it looks very likely that we're not going to meet the target of 450 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, and that it might happen much sooner than we like. So what is art's part in all of this? So far as I'm concerned, art is what makes us human. It's the way that life, human life, and I would argue all life, expresses itself. Well, it seems that art has always been an integral part of the toolbox of survival, and certainly it has been for me personally. It's a process of reimagining and re-engaging with a world encased as we are in a man-made environment which we cannot ignore. We are, after all, Homo faber, the tool-using primate, which has mostly been made in the last 150 years out of an inherited
Earth. But through re-engaging with the earth, the weather, the land, the sea, the air, the wider elemental world that contains us, and with which we have to be in touch to feel alive, and I would say stay alive, as part of all life. And for me, this is about life as it is lived, structures as they exist, time as duration, body as sensor, space as extension. I personally feel incredibly fortunate that as a child and right through my learning and university years, I was able to play by the sea, go to the mountains, somehow feel the smell of salt in the air, feel the touch of ice, know the sound of the groaning of an avalanche, the extraordinary sound of rigging slapping against masts, a sense of contact with the elemental world that I think somehow gave me a base that has stayed with me. So I thought it might be useful to return to an earlier snow traveller, to this continent, to the high Canadian north, a man called Samuel Hearne, who in 1772 came across an Inuit woman. She was 27 years of age, and her entire band had been wiped out. Her husband and parents and infant had been killed. And Hearne's expedition found her living alone. And I read this as an extract from his journal. It is scarcely possible to conceive that a person in her forlorn situation should be so composed as to contrive or execute anything not absolutely essential to her existence. Nevertheless, all her clothing, despite being executed for real service, showed real taste and variety of ornament and material. Though very plain, her clothes were beautifully wrought and so judiciously placed as to make the whole of her garments very pleasing, though rather romantic in appearance. How to interpret this extraordinary, moving picture conveyed in that logbook entry of over 200 years ago? One interpretation would be that art is a tool for survival as much as hunting and the will to survive, an instinctual life drive. It's not, and that this instinctual life drive is somehow not enough. And it seems that between ice ages, when the human population of Eurasia was maybe no more than 100,000 people, art was such an essential tool, both as a reflection on our own condition and a registering of the natural world around us. Can we have the first slide? So this is a graphic rendering of a small work that's hand-sized. It's about 6 inches in height, made 25,000 years ago. It's called the Venus of Lesbouge. In those days, there was a sort of agency, that idea of putting the viewer in the position of co-maker is very, very critical, and puts art back into this position of being an instrument, being a tool. I called it a diagnostic tool when looking at works like Freud's. But with something like this, I think I'm trying to get art back into being a verb rather than a noun, being, in a way, simply a catalyst for a reappraisal through this inert, that's what a catalyst is, and it's an inert chemical that causes a reaction that wouldn't happen without its presence. So What is the real subject here? The real subject is the land, the sea, and the air. That is a constant elemental condition, our wider condition, and you, the viewer. The art is simply an intermediate bridge that perhaps helps make the connection. So, I didn't come here alone. That period of American art was so important to me. The period where, in a way, Pollock was important because he abandoned, in a way, Jung and kind of the idea of kind of illustrating the subconscious, and began to make objects that were not representations but were, as it were, the site of an event. But I think Naumann, and it was funny, as a student I rejected Naumann as being kind of somehow a dumb clown, but I now find these works from the mid-60s totally monumental. Here is an artist who refuses to make objects, but says, I am an artist. What does an artist do? He exists in his studio, and I have to now, in a way, find a way of being in the studio, and here he is just walking a line. An artist simply existing in his studio, because this is where an artist should be, making an act, not a thing. This then, that spirit of clarity, of returning to first-hand experience rather than the making of an object. This wonderful, wonderful elegiac Richard Long, a line made by walking, just simply crushed grass in a field. This for me is Stonehenge. This is again something that connects the indexical memory of a lived moment, of a body in space that allows us to think about our relationship to time and space. Here's an even more recent, this is Tino Segal's These Associations, the latest project from the Turbine Hall and the Tate. Wonderful work, absolutely wonderful. You come into the ramp, somebody says, as you're walking down, I never really knew if my girlfriend loved me, but I didn't dare ask. And anyway, I won't tell you the whole story, but you find yourself suddenly involved in a personal, intimate revelation with a stranger, and that notion of, in a way, connection with another body, then is complicated by a series of actions, movements, clusters and dispersions in which there are no objects. It's only bodies in space that you become increasingly immersed in. I think this was a remarkable work, and you end up talking to people that haven't been instructed, that actually aren't part of the work. It's a viral effect in which the permission that the art provides, the bridge the art that provides for you to reconnect, not in this case with the earth and the elements, but with other human being and other experience. Absolutely extraordinary. Or Richard Wilson's 2040, this sea of sump oil, in which we make a lonely journey and are in a way mesmerized by the world being reflected in itself, a perceptual, strange dissociation. And here is here is Walter de Maria's Earth Room, a place of pilgrimage to me. A first floor apartment, I'm sure many of you have seen this, filled with earth that curiously invites us to look at this, our built environment, our domestic environment, the place of our beds and kitchens and chairs and tables, that's become itself a reliquary. This potential, you smell the humidity of the earth as you walk up these creaky wooden stairs to the first floor, and its promise as a place of growth somehow still held at the threshold, and you stand there, and here you have to recalibrate your relationship to everything that pre-exists human consciousness. So Walter was important to me. He sadly died this year. In this attempt to relink earth and consciousness. So this was an experiment, another version of field. This is 120 tons of clay dug from the ground in China, Shanshan village, Huadu province, Pearl River Delta. This was my attempt to make the earth conscious. Walter left it potent, latent, dormant. I thought things had got more urgent, and we had to allow the earth consciousness. So we made 210,000 little sculptures. This is just taking a handful of clay very quickly. This is a repeated action. There are people bringing clay the whole time. You always have a pile next to you. You have a little field, one meter wide, 3 meters long. Take a handful of clay. You allow it to arise just in squeezing it between your hands. You place it apart from you, allowing it to stand for itself, and you make it conscious by giving it eyes. This was real mass production. I worked alongside 350 helpers, and we basically made this evocation of a human population, or a population, perhaps we shouldn't call it human, which was made by masses of people, and in its total occupation of an existing piece of architecture, it's a metaphor for our human population and its relation to a finite globe. And it inquires into the part that every viewer will play in the emergence of a future in common with the earth. And the way that it works, so each of these, this is actually a detail of the first slide which I made on this continent in Mesoamerica. I've made 5 fields on 5 different continents, and every one is different, both because of the way they're made, the quality of the clay, the nature of the people making. Every piece is the result of a lived moment translated through touch onto the earth, onto this piece of hand-sized clay. But the point is how this works collectively and how it reverses our ordinary relationship with art. The thing is transformed into a form of last judgment. This is as Asian Field was shown in Shanghai in an old steel steel factory. And you as a viewer unwittingly walk onto a stage. There's one threshold, and 210,000 pairs of very small eyes are all looking at you. And I think this is a last judgment. Every viewer, every viewer has sort of somehow put themselves, maybe unwittingly, into this position of being, in a way, between the spirit of the unborn and the spirit of the ancestors that are somehow carried in these tiny objects. And we feel that we are somehow the conscious, free-willed layer in the stratification of life, and we are the ones that have movement consciousness and the potential to transform matter, and are put into this godlike position of being responsible for the future that these potential creatures seem to be pleading for. And I think of all of my pieces, this is the one that puts you on the spot, that makes you the focus of an earthly gaze that somehow doesn't let you go. I just wanted to end with two other works that in some way do the same thing but in a different manner. This is another work where the viewer, I believe, becomes the focus of the work. So here is in the evolution of the work, we move from these empty carapaces, empty cases, the lead body cases, to now masses that instead of the cases sort of somehow enclose a human space in space, these displace a human space in space. This is a body conforming to its environment that works with and against gravity. So this weighs about 632 kilos. So that's over 1,000 pounds. Again, it's mass-produced, but in another way, and all the signs of its industrial production are very evident. Very evidently made at a time of mechanical production. But the way they're displaced in space is critical. These are indexical forms, which are evidently the same, so they've been made again and again, and they've been flung into the farthest corners of a room. And as far as I mean, we know that bees have hexagonal cells in their hives, but so far as I'm concerned, we're the only species that chooses to make a habitat or lives in a square nest on the abstract principles of Euclidean geometry. We're a very strange animal. And I wanted to make these bodies make us aware. So this is you could say that these are kind of curious caryatids, because they're not wanting to support the building, they're in a way wanting to interrogate the building and maybe undermine our certainty about the stability of the room itself. So here is this registration of the place of the human body in an architectural space, but not used either to idealize or sexualize the human form, occupying the parts of the space that are furthest from the center, that tries to unhinge our certainty about the stability of the built world, and in a way, which way is up, and puts the viewer in the idealized central position that normally would have had the naked Venus or the statue of the hero. And maybe I'm hoping too much, but I'm hoping that through this work we might feel this planet spinning on its own axis. The fact that it's spinning around the sun, that the solar system is itself spinning around this galaxy. It's made about 6 trips in the last billion years around our spiral galaxy. And we might even really think about the fact that all those clusters of celestial objects are moving apart, that the scale of space, as we know from the Hubble constant, what used to be called the cosmological constant, but is that memory of the Big Bang that tells us that every 3.25 million light years we are moving apart at something like 220 million kilometers an hour. I mean, astronomical figures. The truth of human space in space, the relationship of a conscious human body in relation to planetary bodies, celestial bodies, spatial bodies generally, is something I'm trying to get at by putting these works into the farthest corners of a room in such a way that I hope the stability of the room itself is undermined, and we might think of it as being in a centrifuge, and these things flung to the corners in order to make us, at its center, reconsider our relationship to time and space. So, here I'm using the language of sculpture most frequently used in its Western history to fix the status quo, reinforce the hierarchy, to do the opposite, to loosen it, and to ask us those questions about where we fit in the scheme of things, the same question that the Easter Island sculptures asked. So, yeah, sorry, that's the whole installation. Basically, 8 corners to a room, 8 sculptures, the same moment reproduced 8 times. We are in the time of mechanical reproduction. So I'm going to end with perhaps what is closest to the Maui of Rapa Nui, the sculptures of Easter Island. 100 works that faced west, the direction that the Pilgrim Fathers went, the direction that the whole expansion of the Northern Hemisphere's so-called developed nations went. What pushed those covered wagons west towards California was an idea that there was another place where things were going to be better. But now there is no other place, and we know that it's impossible for the human body to travel at the speed of light. We will not be able to teleport ourselves to another planet. Our existence is dependent on this singular, unique planet and the whole of the biosphere on which we depend. The idea of putting art, considered in the cultural world as objects of highest value, directly in the conditions of the elements that we depend on, is a way of making palpable reality reflexive. This is me going back to Lansingh 2. It intersects human time with the time of the tide, industrial and digital time with sidereal time, a place in nature that is also a place of mineral extraction. This is 100, again, iron body forms placed over a 2.5 mile length of seaboard on the mouth of the Mersey. The works all get covered by the sea when it comes in. The furthest out is about 25 feet below the surface. And they stretch 2.5 miles along the coast and about 3/4 mile out to sea. There's I don't know if you can see it, but in the far distance there, that's an oil rig. And now they face out, not at the time that I made it, but I knew it was coming. They face out towards a wind farm. This is a place where somehow that transformation of our relationship with the earth, it itself is changing. So, just to end, how can we detach ourselves from a world where all aspects of its infrastructure, from telephones to mobile phones, trains to planes, neurofen to neurosurgery, all of human progress is based on the exploitation of resources? If that is about changing and challenging our core beliefs, then how can art play its part in that job? If we return to that Samuel Hearn quote and the two ways of interpreting, I think both of them are right. That we need to survive in order to make art, but also that art is the thing that makes us survive spiritually, personally, collectively. The fact is that we are both interpreters and manipulators of the material world, whether we are laying the table, making a meal, arranging flowers in a vase, or getting dressed in the morning. These are all creative acts through a shared visual world, and they reinforce our sense of belonging, of identity and communication. But the artist's responsibility is perhaps beyond one of domestic continuance. Art of its nature is hopeful. It aspires to change the world simply by bringing things into it that didn't exist before, and therefore, at whatever scale the world shifts, there's a displacement. What artists never know and would be unwise to imagine is how their work affects the thoughts and feelings of others. However, it does attempt to objectify some truth, however personal, and that is its freedom. A freedom from ideology and a freedom from the status quo. Art is not propaganda. Art is not about policy making. Art is about the proof of a personal truth, which may or may not be inspirational for others, but you never know. The reason that we're on this planet is to reflect upon our own life. Is the reason that we are on this planet to reflect upon our own life and then destroy it. So the question that Jared Diamond asks in Collapse, what did the last man who cut down the last tree on Easter Island think he was doing, doesn't really have an answer. Or I don't have an answer. But he was obviously following the custom followed by his father and his father's father. Perhaps the best that art can do is reinstill in us a sense of where we belong and help us face our demise with calm. Perhaps it doesn't matter how long we're here, but about the quality of our lives while we are. And perhaps art can help us celebrate our being here while we are. So much of the climate change debate seems to be implying that human beings have a divine right to continuance, an inherent value. Well, it could just be that the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs 66 million years ago is like us. We are simply an agent of change in a scheme that we will never fully understand. Maybe we will, as Martin Rees suggests, be able to condense all of human history and all our thought into a tiny microchip and send it out into the unknown without ever knowing whether it will be reflected in consciousness again. Or will we, perhaps, in developing our own consciousness and finding out more about how things work, discover the why, the reason for our existence as a life form, that through that very reflexivity may be able to participate both in our own and the whole of biosphere's transformative evolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antony. So I would like to ask questions, why would we have this event here at the ROM? And it's because we're a museum of both culture and of nature. And we recognize these broad subjects, which are so commonly separated at other museums around the world, are in fact inextricably linked. And so we're a product of our environment, we depend on it, and we're subjects to its vagaries. And that's what this the lecture series is all about. In our subject this year about climate change and the environment. So I would like, at this point in the evening, the Holtby Lecture is turned over to our moderator, who can lead a discussion with our speaker. And this will be followed by a question and answer session in which you will all be invited to become part of the conversation. So we wish to promote a dialogue here about our topic. So this evening we're delighted to welcome Sarah Milroy to the stage as our moderator. Sarah is a former editor of the Canadian Art Magazine and an active contributor to both Canadian Art, Walrus, and the Globe and Mail. Ms. Milroy most recently is co-curator of an exhibition on Emily Carr and the Indigenous art of the Northwest Coast, which is opening at the Dulwich Picture Gallery in South London and is co-produced by the Art Gallery of Ontario. So Sarah, could you come forward?
Can you hear me? Yes, good. Well, here we are on our little blue planet. That is a punishing light. Have you been coping with that?
Very bright, isn't it? Can't see you at all anymore, sadly.
No, well,
You're lost.
We'll just be by ourselves here then. It's not a bad thing necessarily. Thank you so much for your beautifully, beautifully crafted thoughts. I think we all feel...
Sorry, they were a bit crafted.
No,
I've never done that before.
No,
now this is the
wonderful.
relaxed bit, so you can all just pitch in and give me help.
Well, I can understand, though, why you felt you wanted to write rather than just speak extemporaneously, because it was fitted together like a jigsaw puzzle of one thing depending on the next idea. And I can see being concerned about skipping any bits or leaving any steps of the thought process out. So
Well,
I'm
it's a
actually
really-
glad you read.
I mean, it
because-
is a really. I'm just aware of the gravity. I mean, you know, I started with a joke, but it's a big joke, isn't it? I mean, it's a bad joke actually that we might not be here for so long.
I'm very aware you've just had a rather extraordinary experience, which very few people have these days, or I suppose in any time in human history, which is crossing the Atlantic Ocean. And we're sitting here tonight in the middle
By
of...
a boat, it's important to say.
Oh yes, by a boat, by a small boat.
Yeah,
How small a boat was this?
not that small. 100 foot,
Okay.
with a very tall mast that I didn't have to go up. Thank goodness. The mast was 160 feet high.
Well, it just
but there
intrigued
was-
me to think of you doing this because, on the eve of giving this lecture, because I knew what you were going to be speaking about, and a lot of what seems to be implied here is that a lot of what we need potentially to survive is a kind of more developed consciousness about how we are connected to elemental facts of the world, that if we are so dissociated from those things, how can we possibly steward them or each other as fellow beings, whether we're fellow human beings or fellow creatures? I'm wondering how that experience of being in the open ocean affected your thinking, or if it had an impact on your thoughts that you were preparing for tonight.
Well, it was just, yeah, I mean, for me it was a return to that state of, I suppose, being alone but part of. And I mean, this is something that I've thought about a lot. I mean, that thing, you know, our bounding condition is the skin. It's, you know, Aristotle said, you know, that you know, light falls on the surface of things, and in a way identifies substance through appearance. But somehow we live, we clothe our appearances, so we live first of all within our skins, but then within clothes, and then within rooms, within villages, towns, cities. But actually the final, I think our final perceptual container is the horizon. And for 9 days to be out of the sight of land and have this was a very extraordinary, I mean for me, very strange feeling of sitting inside a bowl. And even though for quite a bit of the Atlantic, you're 5.5 kilometers above the surface of the Earth without being in a plane. So you're suspended, if you like, above the planet through this element of the water. So most wonderful color. I was so surprised at the color. It's deep ultramarine. But you feel like you're in a bowl. And I kept asking, where do you think that edge is? And of course it changed the whole time. I suppose somebody would be able to tell me. I mean, it's something to do with the curvature of the Earth, but then also obviously the swell of the sea. But I was worried. I thought this was another one of these, like, sublime kind of oceanic and fear moments. But actually, there was no fear in it. Mm-hmm. And I felt like I was contained in this huge open dish of benign water. I mean, even when it was, 25 knots of wind and a good sea, somehow I just felt at home. And people, often say about the work, well, it's about loneliness and it's kind of existential kind of. And I mean, there were plenty of people on this boat, but the bits that I liked were just being up front and just being there with the sea. But those times which maybe don't happen enough for us, when we can just be in, I suppose, in a silent enough space where we can feel the relationship of our bodies to space as extension. I mean, they're very rare, and I guess, with a lot of the things I'm trying to do, I'm just trying to reinforce that. And you could say, well, it's really boring. And
that sense of your own corporeality.
But that as an exciting thing, that it's not, you don't have to read it as a story. And if you forget about it as everybody thinks that a body in an art thing has to be telling you a story. Well, I don't think it does. I think it can just be, as I'm suggesting, a kind of catalyst for something else. But anyway,
this is likely why it frustrates you when some writers and critics talk about Antony Gormley continuing the figurative tradition in sculpture. You always see that sort of lazy sentence tossed at you.
Well,
and I think it annoys you.
If I am supposedly continuing the figurative tradition, I'm doing a really bad job. No, well, I am, aren't I? I mean, it's really, well, because it's...
Because you're undermining
they're stiff dummies, I mean, give me a Bernini any day, this is not in many ways, I am not a figurative artist insofar as, it's interesting that, I'm often having to make the distinction between the figure and a body. I think I'm interested in bodies and then inquiring into what a body is, not the figure. And why not the figure? Because the figure is always, in some senses, put to action. The basis of, and I admire it in its own sense, the basis of Western figurative sculpture, of which there are wonderful examples in this museum and in the ROM. That new crucifixion of Bernini's in the ROM and the way that it's displayed is just fabulous, isn't it? But what does that come from? It comes from an understanding of the relationship between bone, skin, and the muscle in between, and using that understanding of anatomy to express emotion and tell a story, often about suffering and about redemption and great stories. But I'm not interested in that.
So talk to me about the difference between Bernini's crucified Christ and this Buddha over here. If we're talking about the figurative tradition for a moment.
Yeah, this is the celestial.
And where you would be in relation
this is
to this.
This is an abstract body. This is the celestial body of Buddha materialized. This is not a representation. It's an imagination. It comes from, in a way, the idea that being itself has to be reimagined. And it has nothing to do with portraiture. It has to do with making an object that is a catalyst for contemplation. And yes, there are certain symbolic. The mudra is, particular. There are attributes and things, the sitting on the lotus, all of these things that are cultural signifiers. But the body itself is an abstract body, and I think that's what I learned. I love Khmer. The portrait of Jayavarman the Seventh in Angkor Thom is one of the most sublime images, and it is in a way the Buddha of compassion in the person of this extraordinary historic figure. And it's entirely invented. And I guess Pala and Kola bronzes have the same quality of pneuma. There's a sense, and maybe this has it as well, I can't see it very well, but there's a sense in Maturan also stone carving of this breath inside. There's a sense in which we're not interested at all in like muscular
Anatomy,
flexion.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
They're interested in the notion of this the breath inside the body that is acting on this apparent edge of the body, and often that's carried into the way that drapery is used. Drapery is used both to reveal as much as it is to conceal, and somehow the lines of the drapery are used to express some kind of field of energy. And I think I am more interested in Jain and early Buddhist and early Southern Indian Hindu sculpture than I am any other. Even though I'm not unaffected by fine bits of boxwood carving, of which you have many examples downstairs.
Here. Well, you've talked to us tonight a little bit about landmarks of contemporary art, British and American contemporary art, and I'm wondering about, I feel that it's important for us to talk with the audience about the fact that you made the decision. I think you'd already begun your art education or perhaps you just finished your undergraduate work in archaeology and anthropology, making the decision to go and pursue the study of meditation in India for 3 years, so a long period of time for a young man. And it's continued to have a very important role in your understanding of what you're trying to do with your work, I think.
Yeah, I think the meeting Goenka, who was a Burmese businessman who became a teacher of Vipassana, that's a Pali word which means bear attention. But I think that was an incredibly important key for me. It was interesting, the rediscovery of, I guess, the body as a space was a return for me, because I don't know how many of you had the same experience, but growing up in the 50s, anyway, it was deemed to be a really good idea to send children off for a rest after lunch. Really bad idea, but anyway, I was sent off to this little room that was actually a solarium. It was on the first floor of our house in London. Was a strange mixture of Lutyens to the north and Bauhaus to the south. Anyway, there were this kind of metal framed windows from floor to ceiling, very, very hot. And I was sent up there to so-called sleep after lunch for my enforced rest. It was very much enforced, and I was an obedient, good Catholic, child. And so I would lie there. Sleep was not really an option. But anyway, I'd lie there, and I would be lying there with my eyes closed, and there would be this like red hot light behind the eyelids, and all this light. There was just all this light, and it was just so hot, and it was so claustrophobic, and it was just horrible. And I was in this tiny, like bright red matchbox space behind my eyes, and I was like dying in a way. But I was a good Catholic boy, and I did what I told. And I was going to lie there. I was going to have my, I was going to have my rest. But this experience of being in this tight, hot, red, compressed space, my enforced rest was exactly a half an hour long, and that half an hour was long enough for me to dwell in that space. And what was extraordinary about it was how it became less hot and less claustrophobic and less tiny, and it expanded and became bigger and cooler and darker and freer. And I'd forgotten all about this anyway. I mean, it was a repressed kind of trauma, really. Those enforced rests, and then suddenly, there I was in the Himalayan Heights Hotel or wherever it was in Dalhousie, doing my first
pursuing an enforced rest.
My first hour and a half meditation. And where was I? I was back in this space, and I said, I know this place, and this is quite interesting. Anyway, but anyway, it was a return. It was a return, and I got really very, I think, energized by that idea that actually you don't, in order to achieve some kind of knowledge and some kind of understanding, it's not necessary to read what somebody else said. It's not necessary to follow an authority. That actually you can experience firsthand, directly, some truth. However, in undescribable it is. And anyway, so I was just very lucky, I think, to meet a man that could give me the key to that.
This notion of the body as a place, rather than a thing to be discovered, but one of the things that you touched on just quickly tonight was this idea of our species' fascination with communication and mobility. That this is what we're really crazy to do as a species right now, and build big things. And that maybe these compulsions to do these things are even stronger impulses than our survival instinct, which is kind of a mind-blowing thought. But I'm wondering how you think, one of the things about bodies is that they come out of a place, usually. I mean, I'm thinking about Simone Weil's quotation, to be rooted as perhaps most important and least recognized needs of the human soul. How do you think we're doing as a species, dealing with our new rootlessness, and do you feel like the art that you make has something to do with trying to reconnect us?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that was what I was trying to. Didn't it come across? I'm sorry if I've wasted your.
No.
But the
Well, the sculptures that you've showed us connect us with the elements, but not necessarily with a particular terroir, like a place you come from, necessarily. What do you think it means for the species that we rove all over the place and don't stay and migrate
it's a really,
faster and faster?
I think basically, there's no question that human beings are now, having been concerned with territory, having been concerned with, in a way, defining borders of nation states, we're now migrating to nodes that are like synaptic nodes that are, highly connected, and we are constantly bouncing like a pinball between nodes, and at the same time, because of what I call our hermeneutic instruments, in other words, the smartphone and everything that represents our ability to turn experience into image and image into symbolic language. I mean, that everything is highly mobile, and it's difficult not to see when you see those pictures of mobile connectivity, flight paths, the world at night seen from space. It's very difficult not to think of this as a sort of moment, and I don't know whether you've also seen, speeded up pictures of mitosis, or indeed any transformative, exactly the same thing in chemistry. Electromagnetic fields in precipitate solutions before they crystallize. There's a massive kind of hyperactivity. And it's difficult, I was briefly a member of the Theosophical Society, and I founded I became a member in Adyar, outside what used to be called Madras. And that idea, I'm still very taken with the idea. We all know about paradigm shifts. You could say, the last one we went through was the paradigm shift between the industrial and the information age. Well, are we? There's a part of me that wants to believe that we're in another one of these paradigm shifts. There's high synaptic activity. The same thing that's happening actually in now our understanding about brain activity, and that I would like to feel that we're about to shift into a new mode, and what does that mean, and what does that mean? I mean, this is all hypothetical and blue sky thinking, you could say, but what is the relationship going to be between highly dense, highly compacted city centers that are drawing humanity from, as it were, the elemental world, from the countryside? That there's no question that is the most sustainable way that we can exist. But what forces does that put on our, in a way, supply lines? and how, in order for that activity, that constant activity, the promise that we were promised through, in a way, virtual travel, was that we were all going to somehow live in cabins and communicate with each other and never have to drive a car and never, in a way, all be able to work remotely. That hasn't happened. Mm-hmm. So the question we have to ask is now, who will tend nature? And can we all do that? And can there be now a symbiosis, a relationship? You know, that wonderful Lorenzetti painting, the Good and Bad Government. It's in the it's in the Sienese Signoria in Siena, and it speaks about a perfect balance between countryside and city. There somehow the pigs and the chickens and the vines and the oak trees and the acorns and the courtiers and the decision makers are somehow in symbiosis. And there's part of me that dreams that somehow this moment of frenzy, because it is a kind of frenzy where somehow the luxury of air travel, the luxury of cruise liners, the luxury of fast cars, somehow it's still enchanting us. Whereas actually all of us should be happy to go by bicycle, to live in one place, to walk in the countryside that is available to us at the end of a bicycle ride.
Do you see
but
that?
But I've no idea if that's either
do you
achievable.
see that frenzy as being what produces our dissociative state in terms of our relationship to the elements and our grasp of reality? I'm always very struck whenever one goes on vacation, up into the wilderness in Canada or anywhere, and at the end of the vacation when you've been kayaking or sitting on the beach or looking at the stars all night long, and at the end of the vacation people say, it's time to go back to reality. And of course, the fact is you're actually leaving reality and going back to the fantasy. But we've come to invert those terms.
But you see, the weird thing is that I think we are all aware. We were aware today that actually it wasn't raining, that it was, we could see the blue, that it was sharp, that somehow those, we do talk about the weather the whole time. I think you do and we do. That's a cultural kind of constant.
We kind of hang on to that,
And I think the pathetic fallacy still works. We can't think of a better way of describing our moods rather, than the weather. I was drizzly today, or
Yes.
it was a grey old kind of experience. We can't think of it, and I don't think I mean, even though the dystopian part of me, that wants to put these watchers of a lost horizon on top of buildings, would like to think that somehow because we've lost our horizon, we've lost our sense of relationship. I don't think we have in ourselves, and I don't think all of those science fiction promises that we would by now all be wearing spray-on suits and be
God, that didn't
eating pills rather than that hasn't happened. In fact, we've gone the other way, haven't we?
Yeah.
We want to eat local. We want to
artisanal cheese.
Eat fruit in season and vegetables, from a field that we, if we haven't tilled it ourselves, that we know the person that did.
Well, I'm thinking here of William Blake sitting with his wife in his
tree.
garden in the Vale of Health, sitting naked under their tree, dressed as Adam and Eve, as they responded to the threat of the Industrial Revolution and the enormous change that was happening to people's definition of what humanness was. And I'm actually curious about your relationship to that tradition in British culture of mysticism.
I'm a bit
in a figure like
frightened of
Blake?
being, put into that category. The fact is that I think of my, in a way, I have to live a contemporary life, and I would love to be able to tell you, Sarah, that I live in a wooden hut on the side of a hill, and I wouldn't be here probably and able to say that at the same in the same life, as it were. But I'm very aware that I am absolutely implicated. I use industrial processes. I'm aware that for every ton of iron that I use in my work, I'm producing two tons of carbon. Maybe not quite, because I use recycled steel, but at the same time, I think that the tradition of Blake, and in, for instance, his songs of experience and innocence, or indeed Jerusalem, there's something about him listening to an interior muse or whatever, an interior direction that made him stand apart from his own time.
Yes.
And I think that is the necessary position of an artist. I am embedded within this culture, but at the same time, I have to stand apart from it. I am embedded within it, but at the same time, I have to investigate my own condition as if I was, in a way, isolated from it. And I think that in the artists that I admire, I love Blake, and I love Samuel Palmer, and I love Stanley Spencer, all for the same reasons, that these were people that hoed their own row, that were not, I feel so grateful that my work has not been consumed. The jury is still out as to whether I'm a nonsense speaker or a nonsense maker, or there is some, as it were, value in what I am attempting to do. The work has not been associated with, as it were, a template of a particular time.
Yes.
It has never aspired to be fashionable. And in the same way, I think that neither William Blake nor Samuel Palmer nor Stanley Spencer had any wish to somehow either break or question the kind of formal aesthetic rules of their time, or in a way contribute to them. They were after something else.
Well, what they had, I think, and this is where I feel the similarity with your work, is what they had was an extremely long view of the context in which they were thinking and working. And I think that's one of the really remarkable things about your work, and about the kind of perspective you brought to the remarks that you prepared for us tonight. I'm aware that there are some people standing here, and they're not yet waving or making slashing motions. But I think the feeling is that we maybe have a moment for a few quick questions, but I think we're about to run out of time. So does anyone have any pressing questions or thoughts? There's someone back here who wants to say something.
Thank you very much for your lecture. I wanted to ask you if you would say a few words about the Angel of the North.
The Angel of the North. Could you say a few
Oh.
words about the Angel of the North? It's actually a fascinating piece because you told me that it's been subjected to quite a bit of controversy and different sorts of interpretation.
Yeah,
that
I mean,
fascinates me.
the Angel of the North was hated as an idea, and then has become loved as a fact.
Can you just describe physically for people that may not know the piece?
Was there did you see any? Was there an image of it in the preceding images of the?
Oh, was there?
Anyway,
Okay.
it's this is a work that exists on a little mound that is just south of the Tyne. And is next to the A1, which is the principal artery that connects the south with the north in the main island of the British Isles. So England with Scotland. And it's a 65 feet high body form. Again, it's a body case with wings that are about 165 feet wide. It weighs 200 tons. It has a foundation of about 500 tons, and the mound that it sits on is actually the destroyed pit head buildings of the St Anne Colliery, where people for 300 years worked underground. There was an international competition that I didn't go in for to make a sculpture for this very poor community. Gateshead had always been under the control of Newcastle. Had always been on the wrong side of the river. Had a history of being exploited by the richer northern side, Newcastle. And at the time that they decided that they wanted a sculpture on this site, there was 27% unemployment. Anyway, Gateshead Council decided that they wanted a work, and they contacted me and Antony Caro. Anyway, in the end, they gave me this job, and it was an extraordinary thing for a Labour council to do, to want a landmark sculpture at a time when there was absolutely no money for schools, hospitals, and all of those civic needs that. And we were lucky enough to get money from the lottery, from the European Regional Development Fund, and indeed from Jay Jopling, my gallerist, who said, let's make some models that we can sell. But for me, it was a wonderful experience, and part of what I've been very passionate about, really. And this was as a result of, I think, studying anthropology. That idea that art only exists in museums or galleries or private collections was something that I wanted to question, or anyway extend. And I always thought that somehow art ought to be able to arise out of some collective, in a way, desire or potential. And what was wonderful in Gateshead was I did do these very crude drawings which somehow got into the newspapers, and they were, when there was a headline in the Gateshead Evening Post, "Nazi but nice," they found an Albert Speer Luftwaffe monument that somebody had put up outside Berlin, which was a man with Messerschmitt wings.
I think what was so successful about it, though, is that you could read it, I presume, in that way, as a sort of a totalitarian, fascistic monument, or it could be read as a signifier of hope and and safety. And I mean, when I look at it, I see the idea of the angel of the north kind of protecting from the north, and the urban space around it or under it is protected by it and shielded by it. It's like a avenging angel that protects.
I think it is
becomes
that
precisely ambiguous.
guardian angel thing. But for me, it was a. And basically, it was a teddy bear. It was a teddy bear for, in a way, comforting a community that was actually suffering very bad from one of these paradigm shifts. The shift from, this was a time when all the shipyards were closing. The Thatcher had successfully decimated the coal mining industry, and people were really suffering. Communities were falling apart, and here was something where the skills that were endemic to the area could be concentrated in making something that wasn't strictly speaking necessary, but could become, in a way, a totemic focus for the community. So, unfortunately, the work has become kind of the precedent for all the county councils in Britain thinking that somehow their key to regeneration is to kind of make a 30-foot high fiberglass squirrel for Hertfordshire or something. And you can't predict that. You can't predict. And it just was an incredible story, because honestly, this was used as a political football, as you would imagine, and the Liberal Democrats were just saying, what's going on? Here's a Labour councillor, a council that has just completely lost its sense of responsibility to its community, erecting these, this massive kind of rusty monument to its own kind of power, when it doesn't really have any, and it's quite clearly lost its marbles, and we've got to stop this. So there were people collecting signatures, 25,000 signatures, stop the sculpture. And then, what happens is, it was absolutely magic. This night, it was St. Valentine's Day, February, warm night, and this huge, great body, 100-ton body, on a low loader with 48 wheels, that can't go on the motorway, has to make its way through the old mining villages. And the miners came out with their pints of beer from the pubs and kind of cheered it on its way. And this was all filmed by Time Tees Television. Anyway, it was a quite incredible thing, because then on the day of the final lifting of the body and the attachment of the wings, that all happened within about 14 hours, people just kept coming until, even though they'd been told to stay away because this was a dangerous civil engineering thing. There were about 3,000 people there, and it really became, it was like one of those, raising of the totem pole. It was a moment in which the community suddenly felt, here we have an object that stands for us, that stands for our history, that shows that we can make things, that we are capable of, in a way, making things that last, that are serious, that the world's got to take notice of. This is our standard, and this was a big shift from polite champagne being drunk at an opening in Bond Street. This is a very different. This was a very different community of interest, and it was putting art back into an active role. And I was in tears because it was quite incredible, the number of people that came, and immediately said, this is fantastic. You have given us, in a way, something that celebrates our past. The number of people that said, "I've got an uncle, I've got a brother, I've got a grandfather who died in that mine," and now we've got somewhere we can go. The shipbuilders who said, you know, nobody's asked us to do inline bending. This is where you can use oxyacetylene flame and ice cold water to make really quite thick plate to bend, and we had to recover this skill that's normally used to make the bow bulges of large ships, to make the top of the head and the shoulders. And, you know, here they had that skill somehow demonstrated. But anyway, it was an extraordinary shift from super suspicion and antagonism to embracing.
Well,
it was a good story. Yeah,
it's a very good story. I think we're out of time, I'm afraid to say. But thank you for telling us that story.
Sarah, I'm sorry.
And all the other fantastic stories you've told us tonight, including crossing the Atlantic.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah.
My great pleasure.
So thank you, everyone. I'd like to thank our speakers, Sarah and Antony, and to thank Cape Farewell, and especially the Holtby family who supported this lecture, Marcus and Christopher, who are here with us tonight. Thanks, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you, Mark.